I'm Yamina Bibi. I am currently a deputy head teacher at Sarah Burnell School in East London, and I've written this book. I can't believe I made it because it was meant to be published 2 years ago, and life happens. But it's finally going to be out. Thriving Your First Years of Teaching, with Corwin and Sage Publishing, and it is a little guide for teachers, one in a number of series of books, really supporting teachers in the classroom with top tips, and hopefully this book will inspire and support our early career teachers, but also their mentors and school leaders. And in this kind of keynote, I'm going to be sharing some of the work and some of the tips and strategies that I share in the book for ECTs, but really thinking about it from a senior leader position, and what senior leaders can do to really help our early career teachers not just come to teaching, but stay in teaching. And I should say this, I'm about to approach my 15th year in teaching, and I can't believe it's just flown by. And it's just really exciting to still be here in the profession when I know lots of people who started with me have left the profession. And writing this book has really helped me reflect on my own journey, but thinking about what mentors did for me and what senior leaders did for me. And I hope that I'm going to share some of those strategies with you today to then be able to implement and hopefully get you to buy the book, which is a bit of a cheeky request. So who am I and what do I do? I am, as I've said, a deputy head teacher, but more so I'm really interested in social justice, in diversity, equity, inclusion. Lizana mentioned that I've done work with BayMed. I'm now a diverse ed associate, and I'm a network leader for Women Ed, which is a global charity organisation looking to really inspire and support women, females in education, in terms of aspiring for senior leadership, middle leadership. But we know that starts with our early career teachers. And this is kind of my journey, and this is where I am. And I started my PGC in 2009, and then I did my NQT year, what we now call an ECT year, in Lewisham, in Sedge Hill, and I've gone all the way through my career. And all throughout that journey, I've had mentors and senior leaders and other leaders who really supported me, who really advocated for me. And that's why I'm really passionate about doing the same for others. And I think we as senior leaders and leaders, whether you're senior leader, middle leader, whatever your role, we all have a part to play, not in just the lives of our young people, but also in the lives of new teachers, and keeping them in the profession is really important, considering the fact that we have a recruitment and retention crisis. I'm also a Resilient Leaders Elements consultant, which is a virtual coaching toolkit that really supports leaders in understanding themselves and leading through themselves, but also through others. And at RLE, which is short for Resilient Leaders Element, we talk about these four kind of elements really of leadership. We think about that clarity of direction, having a really clear vision as leaders is really important. And when we're thinking about our early career teachers, how far do we really map out and have a vision of what we want success to look like? How far do we get early career teachers to align to the vision of the school? Yes, but also what is our vision for them? Thinking about, awareness of ourselves as leaders. Do we really appreciate our own and others' motivations, their cultures, their strengths, their weaknesses? How far do we then utilize this information to support them in thriving, being aware of ourselves as leaders, but also having an awareness of others as well? And then as leaders, having that leadership presence, being really true to ourselves, having integrity, being values-led and ethical. We can talk about supporting our colleagues to do that, but if we are ourselves as leaders aren't really sure about our values, our ethical code, what that really looks like, how far are we going to be able to support our early career teachers and our colleagues in general to be able to thrive? And then sometimes this is the thing that we don't really know. I mean, I've really struggled with this element, but that resilient decision making, are we able to take those valuable ideas from concept to reality? Are we able to challenge our own biases, to notice our own biases, but also challenge others' biases so that we can really have impact? And hopefully some of the strategies I'm going to share from the book, but with a kind of spin through senior leadership, will really support. But why did I write this book, and why is it important to think about helping, our new teachers to thrive in their first years of teaching? Well, I'll give you a moment to have a look at this slide. Feels a bit sad, doesn't it? That overall recruitment to ITT reached 71% of target number of trainees. And that's an issue because it doesn't just affect ITT trainers, but it also affects us in schools, thinking about our legacy, thinking about our longevity. And it's really sad to think about this particular kind of data, which looks, and we know that we're feeling it in schools right now. As a deputy head teacher, I'm feeling it, and so are our colleagues. We have a rising number of staff absences. We need our early career teachers to not just come into teaching, but also to stay in teaching. And when we look at the recruitment for particular subjects as a secondary school teacher, 13 out of 17 secondary subjects missed their recruitment target. And that was in the last cycle. I'm curious to know what it's been like this year. And we are, again, living and breathing this if you're in school leadership right now. It's a crucial time to support ECTs. It's not good enough just to say, oh, they're ECTs, they'll be fine. We'll just provide them with the mediocre support. We'll make sure that they get, the challenging classes because it's just easier that way. We have to really think about the data. We have to really think about our early career teachers and how to keep them in teaching so that they're not burnt out. And if we have a look, I'll give you a moment to have a look at this slide. After just 1 year, in June 2023, it was reported that huge number of teachers are leaving the profession. And we know that a lot of them are saying it's because of workload, that they feel like they don't have enough kind of control of that workload either. And that's really impacting on our colleagues who are new to teaching. And I'll give you a moment to have a look at this. And that's in line with what all of our teachers are saying. When we look at the teacher tap data, for example, lots of our teachers are saying that workload is unacceptable at the moment. And with this, particularly with early career teachers, 59% of early career teachers surveyed were least likely to agree that workload was acceptable. What is it about what's happening in schools that is leading to them feeling this way? And what can we as senior leaders do to really support? These are the chapters, a bit of a promo, but these are the chapters within the book because these are the things that I thought and I felt through my own research, through kind of case studies, that early career teachers wanted to know how to thrive in their school. So they stay in the school rather than leaving that school. How do they thrive in their classrooms? How do they thrive in that wider professional role as a form tutor, but also beyond that, thinking about enrichment, thinking about how they can contribute to their school, beyond just their classroom and their subject or their phase, thinking about how we can support them in managing their workload and well-being. And also that chapter 5 is about how do we support them in getting into that next role, really moving them forward, career progression and succession as well. So the first thing I thought about was what can school leaders do to support ECTs? And this is something I've been thinking about a lot anyway. And Lizana mentioned that I used to be the professional coordinating mentor at my previous school, at Forest Gate Community School, and I worked with as a subject mentor. But the first thing I would say is start with the mentors. As senior leaders, upskill them. And I know that we have subject mentor training, we have those kind of ECT training, mentor training sessions, but don't just rely on that because sometimes you need kind of in-house mentoring and in-house support for the mentors. So something that I did when I was a professional coordinating mentor, leading on mentors and early career teachers, both PGCs, ITT, kind of as well as NQTs at the time, was to provide mentor training on a regular basis. That mentor training was about teaching mentors how to actually set smart targets, how to identify the needs of their early career teachers, and then making sure that there was really clear guidance from me as a professional coordinating mentor. And as you can see, here's an example of one from a very long time ago now, but where I'd actually, as a professional coordinating mentor, the senior leader in charge, providing them with the centralized mentor meeting minutes. And not because it was about control, but it was about training. For some of our mentors, they're new to mentoring and they might not know what kind of things are the right things to discuss at that time. They might look to their mentees for discussion. But like with young people, sometimes self-reporting isn't always accurate. So having that oversight as a senior leader to be able to direct some of those conversations, still giving our mentors autonomy, but also directing them so they've got they're reducing their cognitive load, but also giving mentors flexibility to adapt. And so here's an example of kind of agenda item on this side, and then some kind of things that they could do. So when it comes to lesson planning, that's the first couple of weeks back, or first weeks as an ECT. I'd actually planned for them to think about their last week's lessons, what had gone really well, what did they find really challenging, and then giving them with their mentor time to look at a specific research video, a specific video that was linked to that particular kind of personalized response, and really having a focus. So, saying, for example, in autumn one, all of our ECTs are going to focus on behavioral learning, and the ECF framework has really supported us in being able to do that. But then, where is the kind of bite sized, practicable, observable action steps to support our young people? And I think it's the role of senior leaders to be able to support our mentors in being able to do that, and doing that on a regular basis. Not just saying, oh, they've had their mentor training and that's done. Actually, on a regular basis, for autumn term, summer term, spring term, that was a one, but throughout each term, actually checking in with mentors, providing those standardized meeting minutes, checking in and saying, oh, actually, is that an effective action that's being, because that's really important as well. It's not enough just to leave our mentors to it. We want to support them in actually ensuring that the action steps that are being set for the ACTs are actionable and practicable and they are clear, because then that has a negative impact on our ECTs. If an ECT doesn't know what that meant, that action step means, then they can't then implement it, and then they're going to stagnate, and that's really important for me. It's really also important to train mentors on how to give and receive feedback. And the reason I say receive feedback is because sometimes it's really important for mentors to know, actually, could we try this way for this ECT? And Radical Candor is one of my favorite books when it comes to leadership and thinking about kind of giving and receiving feedback. And I'll just give you a moment to have a look at this quadrant. But in this quadrant, and I think this applies not just to ECTs and to mentors, but it applies to all types of leadership. Sometimes we find ourselves being, caring really personally for our ECTs. And I'm saying this because this is literally my number one problem. That I really, we deeply care about the progression of our ECTs, of their success, but maybe not challenging directly, and maybe giving them targets that are a bit like, oh, maybe you could try this. When actually what the mentee needs is direct challenge, is direct targets. I say, actually, we noticed is this, and here's an action step for you to try in your next lesson. So caring personally and challenging directly is really the kind of sweet spot. This is where we want our mentors to be in terms of the training that they provide and the feedback that they provide. But also for our mentees to also be able to grow, we need to be honest and say, hey, I care about you and I really want you to succeed. And this is the feedback I'm going to give you to succeed. And I'd like to see this in the next few weeks or the next 2 weeks, because that leads to profound change according to this research. Susan Scott, in her book Fierce Conversations, also gives these really clear kind of brilliant, these 7 steps to supporting feedback, which I think is really powerful. And again, when I was a younger teacher, when I first became a mentor, I didn't really have training that trained me from any senior leaders on how to give that feedback. And sometimes I was ruinously empathetic because I really cared about them and I didn't want to upset them. So I would give them lots of brilliant positive feedback, but not always the feedback that they needed. So this kind of framework gives us a really clear way of giving feedback to our early career teachers. So, even about how we might be feeling, oh, this is making me feel a bit uncomfortable. I feel, like this, and actually I'd like to say this. And being very clear with our early career teachers about what's going really well, but also supporting them and having those challenging conversations as well. Okay, so in the book, there's a whole chapter on managing workload and well-being. And if we're saying that we know the data shows that ECTs are saying that workload is something that's a challenge for them, what are we doing as senior leaders to support them in understanding their own workload and managing their own workload? And I don't mean a one-off CPD session as part of an ECT session. I mean, repetitively through mentor meetings, through kind of one-to-one progress review meetings. How are we supporting and providing ECTs with those strategies? So you may have come across this before, the Eisenhower matrix, is really key. And I found it really helpful in helping me prioritize my long-term goals. So it might be that we give our ECTs lots of tasks to do, but how far can they prioritize that and manage that? And this quadrant just really helps them understand that there are things that might be urgent and important, things like lesson planning. That's going to have to be done for tomorrow. And I might not know what I'm going to do until that today's lesson. I've done today's lesson, I've taught today's lesson, and actually I've realized they haven't quite got that metaphor. They haven't really quite grasped that particular method that I really want them to understand and be able to analyze. Right, tomorrow I'm going to have to plan. That's urgent and that is important. But there are things that are important, are big picture strategic things, but are not urgent. And that's where we really want to help our ECTs to be able to understand those things. So maybe it's a book that they want to read about lesson planning or behavior or something that they're really interested in, like subject knowledge, which we know is important, but it might not be urgent, immediate. And we want to really help them prioritize through this time management matrix. Another strategy that you could use to support your ECTs is helping them really explicitly prioritize. And I just did this with the maths team actually, because I line manage the maths team at Cerebral now. And I just did a session with them about managing their workload. And we looked at prioritizing and how do you really prioritize? Because sometimes that everyone will say, and I feel like this, everything's urgent and important, Yamina. And this ABCDE method from Brian Tracy's Eat That Frog is really helpful. So it's getting them to write down a list of all the things that they have to do, and then getting them to prioritize based on things that you must complete to things that you can eliminate. And the reason the book is called Eat That Frog is it comes from Mark Twain saying that if the first thing that you do in the morning is eat a frog, you've done the worst thing possible, so everything else seems a bit easier. And helping them realize that if there's something they're putting off that they know they need to do, then actually getting them to do that first thing in the morning is going to make them feel better. And I'm a queen of procrastination, so I really feel that pain of, I know I've probably got to mark all of those kind of 30 bits of essays, and as an English teacher, there's a lot to mark. But if I do that first, then the rest of my day might be easier. And thinking about in terms of priorities, are they prioritizing the right things, and are we supporting them in understanding what is a priority and what isn't? Another strategy, and it is full of strategies, so please bear with me. Another strategy I suggest to ECTs and through senior leadership teams is this Pomodoro method. If they have a report to write, if they have marking to do, setting aside 25 minutes or 30 minutes of their time and using kind of a timer to say, right, I'm going to decide on the task I need to do. I'm going to set a timer for 25 minutes or 30 minutes, and I'm just going to work on that task. I'm going to put my phone away, probably in another room. I'm going to shut myself off in my classroom, and I'm just going to do this marking. And I'm going to do about 10 bits of essays, and that's what I'm going to do. And in between, I might take 5-minute breaks. I just need to get it done. And this Pomodoro kind of method is really interesting because it helps me as somebody with ADHD. It really helps me kind of really manage my time and really make me feel a sense of success. And this is a strategy again that we can share with our ECTs in supporting them with their workload as well. How else can school leaders support ECTs? Well, Hannah Wilson in What They Don't Teach About Me About Self-Care, in Sarah Mullin's What They Don't Teach Me on My PGCE, suggests this. For those ECTs who might be career changers, who might be used to having a to-do list that they tick off and it's done, teaching is one of those things that it just never feels done. And then you always feel like you're in rotation, a bit like being on a hamster wheel, I guess. And actually really understanding and helping our ECTs understand that sometimes, our work is never done. There's always going to be a daily, and creating a daily, weekly, fortnightly schedule for things that are key, like lessons, duties, clubs, can really support them. But also what Hannah also suggests is getting them to put in me time. And that might be 10 minutes or 20 minutes a day in school where they just put in some time for themselves, break time, lunchtime, or a specific time that they calendar in so that everyone can see and they can see that's my time. I'm going to spend that time resting, re-energizing, recuperating. That might be over the weekend because you might find as a school leader that there's some trainees or ECTs who are spending their time over the weekend, many of whom might be spending time over the weekend not giving themselves me time, but helping our ECTs understand that our work is never done and it's important to look after yourself and put yourself first is really important. How far does our school strategic plan implement that? How far do we actually have that as a priority in our school improvement plans or our middle leader improvement plans? And how far do we support our ECTs in doing that? Another thing I really love, and this is from Jazz Amplify from Hannah Wilson, who's co-founder of Women Ed and a kind of founder of Diverse Educators. We talk about work-life balance. I don't talk about work-life balance anymore. I talk about work-life harmony and supporting all of our colleagues to understand that for some of us, work is a huge part of our life. Like me, I love work. I love teaching and learning. Everyone will ask me, why do you do so many things on a Saturday that's linked to teaching? It's because it's a real passion for me. And I know that it's something that I'm kind of good at. And I love it. And it's part of my ikigai, my real fulfillment and my reason for being. Getting our ECTs to understand the things that give them energy, but then the things that drain their energy will help you as a school leader and as a mentor understand what drives our ECTs, what drives our colleagues, and what fulfills them so that we can support them in doing more of those things. And then what drains their energy. And I mean, I'm somebody who is drained by marking. I've got to do it. So finding ways in which I can help myself connect to that. So, for example, I talk about Jazz Amplifar, who's a public speaker, talks about to-be lists alongside to-do lists. So if my to-do list has marking, I'm like, oh God, I hate marking, but I know I've got to do it. My to-be list will be, well, okay, I love planning, and I know that if I mark this piece of work, then actually it's going to help me in understanding what I need to do and what lessons I need to plan. So I connect it to things that I really love doing that really energize me. Maybe mentor meetings or in kind of CPD sessions, we get our colleagues and our ECTs to do this. Write down on a list, things that energize you, things that drain you. Think of things that you're going to do to support them to energize, so that they can do more things that energize them, and ways in which we can support them in either limiting the things that drain them or supporting them in conquering those things. So if teachers are saying, behavior is really draining me, the behavior management is really draining me, can we put in solutions and support them to be able to limit some of those things, to stop some of those things in their classrooms as well? As leaders, and I've mentioned that I'm now a diverse ed associate. As leaders, it's really important that we create safe spaces and organizations where all of our colleagues feel celebrated and not just tolerated. And that's being part of diverse educators. And this is the book that's been contributed to, which looks at all the 10, the 9 protected characteristics. It's really important that we think about this from a senior leadership perspective. How far do our organizations celebrate people with protected characteristics that create safe spaces and psychological safety for those colleagues? And as an ECT and for our ECTs, part of feeling a sense of belonging and onboarding them is creating effective induction programs. How far are our induction programs supportive of our colleagues, of really trying to address under some of the issues that our ECTs might be facing? What professional development are we putting in place to support all of our colleagues to understand with protected characteristics so that they feel safe when they come in? I've mentioned already that I'm dyslexic, I've got ADHD, I wear a hearing aid. How far are our senior leadership teams really aware of the protected characteristics of those who are coming into the school and those teachers and support staff who are in the school? And how are we providing professional development to support them so they feel celebrated, they feel a sense of belonging, they feel a connection to the school and its values? I'm just aware of time, but one of the key chapters that I mentioned in the book is all about thriving in your classroom. And we know that's where most of our teachers spend their time. ECTs spend their time, majority of the time, in the classroom. And helping them understand how to plan lessons effectively is really important. As an ECT, and I mean like first year in school ECT, not just ITT or trainee teachers, we might make the assumption that they've been really clear about how to plan lessons effectively, but actually that might not be the case. And there might be that in your school, in our schools, we have specific ways of planning lessons. How far do we explicitly put that into our induction programs, into our CPD programs, without making the assumption that an ECT, whether they start in September or August, or sorry, in January or even later on in April, how far do we onboard them into the way in which things are done at your particular school? So Preps McRae talks about this lean lesson planning. Do all of our ECT know where our learners start from? Do we give them that information at the beginning of the year or the beginning of their term? Do we explain to our ECTs where we want them to go, and how do we support them in planning lessons effectively? How far do we provide systems, particularly when we're thinking about behaviour for learning, particularly when we look at the teacher tap data and just national data around what is really draining our ECTs? Why are they leaving the classroom? Why are they leaving teaching? A lot of them mention behaviour, and I think that's what is exactly what is happening across nationally, not just for our ECTs, but across teaching in general. How far do we put systems in place to ease their cognitive loads, to support them in being able to manage behaviour for learning in the classrooms? So at Cerebral, we talk about being an SB star student. We have a consistent signal for attention, and you can change this, by the way. This is just something that I took from Teach Like a Champion, but you can amend this, and it's just a consistent signal for attention so that everyone sings from the same hymn sheet. And sometimes, as senior leaders or experienced staff, we say, oh, the kids behave for me, or the students, just follow my instruction. It's not about us. It's about supporting our ECTs and providing them with a consistent signal for attention. Doesn't just help our students because it's easy signal, but it also helps our ECTs because then everyone's singing from the same hymn sheet. And they're not then going to go to Miss Bibi's class because Miss Bibi is a deputy head teacher and just behave for Miss Bibi. They're going to make sure that this is something that is the way we do it at our school. We have the signal for attention and we use it. And thinking about those riveting routines that we can put in place as senior leaders to support all of our teachers to thrive in the classroom so that they're really focused on that bread and butter of teaching and learning. I'm just going to move on from this because I'm just aware of time, but you will get these slides. Another really kind of key thing is around marking feedback. And ECTs that I spoke to for the book talked about marking feedback being really challenging and being part of the reason why they're leaving because they feel like marking feedback policies are contributing to their workload. How far are we as leaders really thinking about this and planning this in to our feedback policies? How far have we considered reducing workload but also having a high impact on our young people? Now, something that Tamina Begum at Forest Gate Community School, who's the executive head teacher there, has implemented in her school, and something that we're starting to do at my school, is completely taken retrospective marking out of the equation. So staff are told that they're only allowed to mark in the classroom and they should only be marking in the classroom. As an English teacher, that changed my life because not having to drag 30 books home in my little suitcase or on my bag really changed the way in which I did things. So when I was planning my lessons, I always thought, how am I going to include live feedback in my classroom? How am I going to give the last 20 minutes perhaps of my lesson or keep a key part of my lesson about students applying the skills that I've asked them to do? So if, for example, we're looking at paper 2 question 4, as an English teacher, that's comparing writers' ideas, how far am I going to really model that for students, give them the opportunity to practice that skill, and giving me an opportunity to walk around the classroom and give them live feedback. And it doesn't just apply to my subject, it applies to lots of different subjects as well. Another thing we can think about is how far does our feedback policy really contribute to workload? Really, why don't we use things like whole class feedback sheets? And I think we've really moved ahead in the last few years, particularly I've been in teaching, in moving towards a whole class feedback kind of feedback policy. But are all schools thinking about those things for our ECTs as well? And then finally, we want to not just help our teachers stay in our schools, but stay in teaching. And sometimes the internal network is just as important as the external network. How are we introducing our colleagues and our ECTs to that internal network, not just other ECTs, not just within their departments, but how we help them connect across the school so that they have people that they can go to? And in the book, I actually provide strategies for ECTs on how to do that, exactly do that. How can they find those internal and make those internal kind of connections and networks? Because sometimes, ECTs said to me as part of the research that they felt like a burden on their mentors. They felt like a burden on their senior leaders because they were constantly asking questions. How far we keep creating those safe spaces for our ECTs to be able to then make those connections with other colleagues. And we know those corridor conversations can be really powerful. How far are we creating those spaces to do that? And then really supporting our ECTs and really supporting our colleagues in general with those external connections and networks. Teaching can sometimes feel alone when you're in the classroom, but it can also feel really collaborative, and it is a collaborative profession. How far are we helping our ECTs connect with these organizations like WomenEd, which I've mentioned, that I'm a network leader for, or BayMed, which Lizana mentioned, Disability Ed, LGBT Ed, and diverse educators. Now, all of these networks are not just networks for those people with those particular protected characteristics, but they're there to support everyone, and they're there to support colleagues really make those connections and to thrive. Because if we want our ECTs to not just come into teaching but to stay in teaching, we need to help them feel like, we need to remind them that we are a collaborative profession and a profession that is really outward facing and really supportive. So how far are we supporting our ECT to make those connections? And in the book I talk about, joining social media sites like X, or formerly known as Twitter, or LinkedIn, to really connect with people as well beyond their school. Because sometimes when you don't get it in your school, it's really important to find those advocates and allies outside of school. And when we're thinking about advocates and allies, how do we then help our ECTs to prepare for that next step? You might have a super colleague who is just fantastic in the classroom, who's made those connections, who's thriving in their wider professional roles, setting up all those enrichment, clubs and after-school extracurricular clubs and supporting students. How are we supporting them? Who are we surrounding them with? And I always give a shout out, and I always end one of my keynotes with these amazing women. And Maya Angelou said, surround yourself with people who will say your name in a room full of opportunities. But I also developed that and say, you surround yourself with people who will support you, who will advocate for you, who will be an ally for you, who will help you realize that teaching is a beautiful profession, is a rewarding profession. And yes, it has its challenges, but I've stayed in teaching for so long because I felt the reward of it. And I've had people like, Hannah Wilson, Booker Yusuf, Vivian Porritt, Tamina Begum, who have, as the girls call it, my students call it, backed me, who've advocated for me, who've helped and supported me, who've provided me mentoring. But then when I've lost my mentor because I'm no longer an ECT, have then provided me with that informal and formal mentoring and coaching to help me thrive. Because without all of these amazing women, not just the women that you see on the slide, but all of those other women and all of those other amazing colleagues who supported me, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have written a book. I would never even consider being a deputy head teacher. And that's what we want. We want our ECTs as senior leaders to continue the legacy, to stay in the profession, because we need them. We absolutely need them more than they need us. And I think it's our duty as senior leaders to provide them with the support, and the advocacy and the allyship and the networks to thrive. And I'd like to leave you with that question. How are we as senior leaders going to not just help our ECT thrive in their early career teachers, but stay in the profession for the long term so they become the next Hannah Wilsons, Booker Yusufs, Vivian Porritts and Tamina Begums of the education sector. Thank you very much.
I feel like I should applaud Yamina. Thank you so much and well done. And thank you for just giving us all those wonderful golden nuggets to reflect on. I can see you is applauding and Jennifer is applauding as well. It's really inspirational. Thank you so much for that. And such an important point to make at the end. We need to inspire the next generation to become the new Vivian or the next Vivian Porritts or the next Bucky Yusufs, etc., and Hannah Wilsons, because I know you and I have hugely benefited from WomenEd. Every time we felt slightly low, there would be a conference and it would just build us up. Similarly with the BayMed networks, etc. You've got high praise for Monica as well. So thank you so much for joining us. And I know in the book Derek and I work on mentoring and coaching, there's also a chapter for WomenEd where there's a case study on yourself and Bucky and how mentoring supported you. So do have a little look at that. That's a really inspirational piece. So it's time for questions for Yamina. one of the phrases I actually do love is that you were talking about your work-life harmony, and you've also talked about your to-be list, your to-do list. So I'm definitely going to borrow that for my own work, my own way of planning my own life. So a really different way of thinking around that. Work-life harmony. I think that's a great thought. So any questions from colleagues?
I think, Lizana, I can see Anika's written a question. I'm going to answer that. So,
Okay,
thank you, Anita, for writing. Anika, for writing in the
brilliant.
chat. Yamina, how did you decide leadership was a pathway for you? Um, it started quite young for me. I mean, I grew up surrounded by teachers. My sisters, there's 8 of us, but 4 of us are girls, and we were all taught and told by our parents, teaching is the best profession, education is the gateway to success, and I saw that in my parents. But when I came into teaching, I thought I'd stay as an English teacher, and I love teaching English. I love my subject so much. All my sisters are primary school teachers, and I saw my mentor, Teresa Dunseith, who's just a phenomenal woman, and I give her a shout out in the book actually because I never thought it was something that I wanted to do, and I watched her as she was my mentor as English teacher. She was also the school's professional coordinating mentor. And I just remember watching her and being so inspired by her. And she actually sat with me. She said, "Oh, I can really see this you becoming the next, doing this what I'm doing eventually." And I that really ignited something in me. And she talked to me a lot about aspiring leadership, even as an NQT. And I think sometimes we wait until 3-4 years into somebody's a teacher to say, oh yeah, have you considered middle leadership? Have you thought about TLR? Have you thought about phase leader? But she had that conversation with me in my NQT year. In my NQT year, because she was a professional coordinator mentor, she made me do twilights. I was delivering twilights as an NQT, just small group twilights, but saying, oh, noticing that she thought my effective practice around questioning was really great. She made me share my strategies. My teacher TA support was really fantastic. She went and made me do a strategy, a, a twilight session on that to all staff. And I was a nervous wreck, but getting me to do that from a very, very early stage in my career really made me passionate about teaching and learning, and actually feel like it was something I wanted to do. So because of her, and because of the fact that she then helped me kind of have a 5-year plan, and I said to her, in 10 years' time, Teresa, I want to do what you do. And she was on the old days an advanced skills teacher, and she said, oh, okay, that's kind of phasing out, Yamina, but they've got this new thing coming up called lead practitioner. And I thought, okay, great. And she helped me do backwards planning. So she said, okay, if 10 years time, I think you should do it. But she was like, if 10 years time you want to do this, here's the things that you need to do to be a lead practitioner in English. You need to show, you're the really excellent practitioner in English. Develop your subject knowledge, develop your pedagogy, share your practice. And so that's what I did. And she helped me, and it was her. And then as I moved through my kind of journey, I became a kind of Key Stage 4 coordinator in English in another school, then became a teacher and learning coach, then became a head of department, then an assistant head. And at every point, I've had people who advocated for me like that. Bookie was the person who really, through her coaching when I was a lead prac at Sarah Brunel years ago, said to me, what are you scared of? You're gold dust. And I never believed it. And I had imposter syndrome. And I really thought I was never going to be a leader, because I thought to be a leader, you have to be a particular type of person. You had to be, because no, I didn't see anybody that looked like me at the time in my school. Even at Sarah Brunel, it was a homogenous group of senior leaders. And I never thought somebody like me could ever do it. And Bookie told me that it was possible. And then I left Sarah Brunel and I went to Forest Gate. Then I met Tamina. And she became, at the time when I was there, she was my deputy head, and then she became the head teacher. And that really lit a fire in me. And I thought, oh my goodness, if somebody like Tamina, she's incredibly inspiring, is a head teacher, and she supported me to become an assistant head. And I then built up the confidence to come back to Sarah Brunel and be the first, visibly Muslim assistant head, visibly Muslim, well, person of color on the senior leadership team. And I would never have thought ever that would be possible. So at each point of my career, I've had people, and mostly women, I have to tell you, who've advocated for me. And having coaching through Women Ed, through Bookie, you know, Baymed, and then eventually Diverse Ed has really changed my life. And I'm also the first, you know, I'm the first person of colour to be a deputy head at my school. And I didn't realise how powerful it was until people came up to me, parents, staff, saying, well done, we're really proud of you. Until a student said to me, you've made us really proud and you've made me believe that I can do it too. And I always thought that about Tamina. And now to do that, I think it's really thinking about the advocacy and the allyship, and it can't start soon enough. Don't wait until a teacher is, and you know, in their third, fourth year in teaching to suggest leadership for them. Start early, because that will keep them in the profession as well. And that's, I think, what's kept me in the profession, where a lot of colleagues who started the profession with me have left or have gone to the Middle East or have gone somewhere else because they didn't feel like this was for them. And that makes me feel really sad because they were incredible. And maybe if they'd had advocates and allies like I did, maybe they would have stayed in teaching as well. I hope that answers your question, Anika.
That's a very detailed response, Yamina.
Sorry.
Yes, it did. Thank you, Yamina. Yes, it did.
Lovely. And what I also just wanted to reflect on is, because obviously I had the good fortune and was very lucky to watch you in action, especially at Forest Gate. And I think there you took agency, you gave yourself permission to lead, because you had a very nurturing approach with not only your teacher trainees, but also your ECTs, as well as your colleagues, the professional learning. Because sometimes I would come into your conversations with staff about to observe a student, and that happened during lunchtimes. Every opportunity you had, you talked about teaching and learning and nurturing other colleagues to really find their feet. So I just want you to talk a little bit about that moment when you gave yourself that permission to lead, because I think it's an important pivotal moment for you as an educator and a leader as well.
I am going to say that it was definitely Booker Yusuf's coaching. And I contact that was through Women Ed when we used to have the DFE funding for that coaching. Seeing Bookie on there, she's amazing, by the way, guys. Everyone follow her on Twitter and LinkedIn. But seeing somebody who was visibly Muslim look like me leading the way and I know it was on social media, but seeing her do that, and then having her as my coach, you know, asking me those really important, pertinent questions about what are you afraid of, what are you scared about, what's stopping you, really helped me understand the barriers that I was facing. And a lot of them were systematic or systemic barriers around, you know, not seeing leaders that look like me and therefore thinking that leadership could not be for me because it was only particular types of people who could be leaders. And then realizing through Booker's coaching that if I didn't see it, I'd become it. That, you know, sometimes you have to be the change. And it's hard to be in those spaces. But once I guess design, you know, about permission, but once I'd realized that actually I don't need anyone else's permission. I am a leader already. You know,
Yeah.
that was really hard. It took me years to get to that position, to really give myself permission to actually stop thinking about what other people were saying, to mute my inner critic, and to just lead, to be my authentic self. Because I think, like I mentioned, a lot of the leaders I'd seen previously might not had a different approach to me. And I thank you, Lizana, for saying that I had a nurturing approach, because that's kind of what I always aim for, to care personally, as I mentioned, but also challenge directly. Because I think sometimes I could be ruinously empathetic, but as I've grown in my leadership, I realized that I can be my authentic self, be this kind of what people call bubbly, but like this energizing, energetic person. And I used to limit that. I used to mute that almost and try and be this kind of version of myself that I thought I had to be. And I realized that I was far more I don't know if the word enticing, or I was just a better leader, more effective leader when I was myself, because I was authentic in my values and I made sure that those values aligned with what I wanted to do and who I actually was authentically. And yeah, once I gave myself permission to be myself and to mute my inner critic and stop caring so much about what others thought how I should be and what I thought others felt I should be, I feel like that's really helped me grow as a kind of passionate educator, and not mute this version of myself that you see here. This is authentically me. I am energetic, I am enthusiastic, I do get excited about it, and I'm not ashamed of it anymore like I used to be. I don't know if that answers your question,
Yeah,
Lizanne.
it does. It does. I love the word authentic because its root is in author, so it's authorship. So writing your own story is very much, being authentic as a leader as well. You map out your own story true to you and who you are, and owning that. So no, I know, because I've had the luxury of watching that unfold, I think, and it's really lovely to hear you reflect on that. So thank you for sharing it so openly. Now, I know, Anika, you've written another question in the chat, but I was wondering if you just want to ask it.
Yamina, I just wanted to say that I agree with you. Advocates and allies make a huge difference to where those in marginalized communities, what their career paths actually look like. But we know that this is there's not advocates in all environments. So how do we support the growth of advocates to support people in those marginalized communities who may not necessarily be in diverse environments or diverse areas of the country?
That's powerful, and that's a really brilliant question. This is where I would say about those external networks. If you can't find it internally, look outward. Be outward facing in that. We've got all of these amazing organizations like BayMed, Diverse Educators, Women Ed, LGBT Ed, who have got those coaching programs. A lot of them are free, a lot of them are, sometimes some of them aren't, but essentially look outwards and find those advocates within, outside. And if you're looking to create those advocates, training is so important. We've got at my school, we've got a diverse educators panel. We actually host every term. We meet and we invite everyone in the school to come to these panel meetings to discuss what we can do for those with protected characteristics. We train people on how to be advocates, how to be allies. It's part of our CPD training for senior leadership, for middle leaders. And you've got to, I really believe we've got to be, particularly as senior leaders, strategic about it. It is, I think, the role of head teachers and SLT to train middle leaders and everyone on how to support other people. There's also a brilliant course that Hannah Wilson is part of and introduced me to called I Am Remarkable, and it talks about self-advocacy. And sometimes when you don't have those advocates, and we're just waiting, right? Particularly for people from marginalized communities, sometimes we're just waiting for somebody to back us, somebody to advocate for us. We just need to start backing ourselves and advocating for ourselves. And the thing is about marginalized communities, sometimes we've been brought up in, and I know definitely being born and bred in a British, Bangladeshi, Muslim background, I was taught to be humble, that you don't talk about your successes, you don't tell people that you've done these things, you've got to be humble. And so we're taught self-advocacy is bragging. But in this course, I Am Remarkable, it's a Google free course, by the way, everyone. Sign up to it. Just Google it, I Am Remarkable. Hannah Wilson talks about, like, quoting Muhammad Ali, it's not bragging if it's based on facts. So learning how to advocate for yourself is really important. And this is where, lots of people say to me, oh, you're always on Twitter. You're always tweeting away, Yamina. Lizana said to me, you're always busy. And it's true, I am. Because I know that if I don't advocate for myself, then who's going to do it for me? And I've learned that through my career, that social media sites like Twitter and LinkedIn is self-advocacy. Somebody might, today you might go on and, like Lizana was saying, tweeting about it. But if there aren't advocates like that, like Lizana, thank you for being a great advocate by tweeting about it. But if there aren't advocates like that, why don't you advocate for yourself? How do we do that? Use the social media platforms that you've got. That's why social media, like Twitter, was created, right? For us to be able to have our say. Sharing what you're doing, sharing, if you've done a great teacher learning briefing, if you've done, you've had a great mentor meeting, sharing that isn't bragging because it's based on facts. And I think the other thing that I've started to do is, because I do feel like, oh God, it's a bit awkward, is I'll write down like how I feel, or I feel like I'm bragging, or I feel like it's arrogant for me to do this, or I feel like my year 11s don't, whatever. But on the other side, I write down what do I know? And that's always based on evidence and data. Well, the evidence shows that I've had a really great mentor meeting because my mentees just said, da da da. So there's no harm in me advocating for myself by tweeting that. And I'm going to tell you that all the things I've done, that the kids call, my students call it my side hustle, like writing a book, like going and speaking to other schools, like doing this even, is as a result of my own self-advocacy or others advocating for me. And I would never have been able to do any of those things if people hadn't said, "Oh, you know what? You know, Yamina, she tweeted about, you know, behavioral learning, or Yamina's been, you know, tweeting about this thing, or actually, I heard from Lizana that Yamina talked about leading early career teachers and that book." That's a ripple effect, and that's not just for early career teachers. That's for everyone. So I will say that course again is "I Am Remarkable" by Google. You can it's a free course. It's brilliant about self-advocacy, but finding those kind of advocates is really key as well. Use those organizations. It's, you know, there's some brilliant charity organizations out there who are supporting people from marginalized communities so that they can become the advocates. And if you need anything, you know, I'm also online. You can tweet me, you can drop me a line on Twitter or LinkedIn, and I'm happy to be that advocate too.
Yamina, I was wondering if you have a minute, if you could just share those links in the chat maybe, because I did attend Hannah's course on I'm Remarkable as well, and it's a really great course because it talks to you about how you could self-advocate, how you could use social media, gives you really great tips and ideas, and it's really for everyone, and also women in education who are underrepresented in so many ways in terms of leadership. So a really great course to attend, but also diverse ed, because I know you do this work there as well. But it's been all inspiring, thought-provoking, energizing. So thank you so much for being here and for sharing. But thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Anytime. Thank you so much.